Hello and welcome to the season 5 of my podcast What's in a Story, titled Snippets from Forgotten Pages of History of South Asia. I am Lopamudra Moitro, an anthropologist, writer, translator and columnist, and in my podcast I read stories from my books on India and South Asia. The stories of this podcast are mostly from folklore and mythology and history, and I introduce each story with some additional information from the pages of history, archaeology, geology and others, which actually helps to place the stories within a specific context. In this season, we will be looking at some lesser known or completely unexplored and forgotten stories from history, which has been put together in my books through the help of old books, newspapers, gazetteers, numismatic or epigraphical evidences, which will be mentioned in the introduction of each story. These also help to provide a possible time of the origin of the story. Thanks to you listeners, this podcast, which began as a small individual effort of mine last year in May 2025, today reaches across 12 countries, which apart from India includes Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Singapore, France, Russia, Austria, Germany, UK, Poland, Brazil and the USA. And all this has only been possible for all the listeners and their wonderful support. Let's listen to today's story of season 5 of my podcast What's in a Story, titled Snippets from Forgotten Pages of History of South Asia. Today's story is titled The Strange Sea Voyage of Gilfoy. This is translated from the Bengali story titled Gilfoy Saheber Adbhut Somudro Jatra, where in Bengali the word Somudro means sea, Jatra means travel, Adbhut means strange. I read this from my translated work titled The Collected Stories of Upendrakishore Ray Chowdhury by Aleph Book Company, published in 2023. This book is a complete translation of all the 63 stories of the two books by Upendrakishore, very famous two Bengali books by Upendrakishore. These are Tuntunir Boi, published in 1910, and Golpomala, published in sometime between 1910 and 11. The uniqueness of this story is Upendrakishore wrote this story on the basis of a very small newspaper report which took place around 1883-1884, and it was published in a newspaper in Australia. Of course, as you will understand when I read the story, the incident in itself was quite interesting in those times and really deserved a place in a newspaper. I would like to read the news, a very small tiny piece of news from the newspaper, the Central Queensland Herald, from the year 1883, and I read this from the pages of the State Library of Queensland, Australia. The link of the page is provided in the information section of this story. The title of the column in the newspaper is Australia's Maritime History, and the news goes as: A lone voyager. The lone voyagings of Captain Voss in the Tillicum during 1910 to 11 attracted considerable attention, but so far as crossing the Pacific single-handed is concerned, he was only repeating history. On January 29, the schooner Aleph Book, when about 160 miles off Sandy Cape on her way to Maryborough, sighted a small boat and soon brought it alongside. In it was a man named Bernard Gilfoy, in the last stages of exhaustion from exposure and hunger. His customs clearance was dated San Francisco, August 18th, 1882, and it stated that Gilfoy was starting, quote unquote, on a voyage of pleasure, unquote, for Australia in the boat Pacific, which was of 2 tons register and only 18 foot long by 6 foot beam. The opportune appearance of the Aleph Book stopped the fall of the curtain on a venture that seems in any case to have passed from the memory of most people. I end here the reading, and this small piece of news was picked up by Upendrakishore Ray Chowdhury, and he drafted a story around it, and this was published by Upendrakishore in one of the issues of his magazine for children, Sandesh. Later on, many stories of Sandesh was picked up by him and made into the book Golpomala. This strange sea voyage of Gilfoy is one of them. A little about Upendrakishore Ray Chowdhury. A prolific writer, illustrator and publisher, Upendrakishore Ray Chowdhury is a well-known name, especially in the genre of Bengali children's literature. He was also the first printer and publisher to introduce modern block making, including half-tone and color block making in South Asia. Apart from his collection and publication of folk tales from the erstwhile region of Bengal, in India, Upendrakishore was known for encouraging scientific thought and musical appreciation through his writings for children. He was born on the 12th of May 1863 in the village called Mushua in Mymensingh district of erstwhile Bengal, present day in Bangladesh. Born as Kamudaranjan Rai to Kalinath Rai, he was adopted when he was 5 years old by Hori Kishore, a relative and a zamindar, a landlord in Mymensingh. Hori Kishore renamed Kamudaranjan as Upendrakishore, and through him as well, that is through Hori Kishore, the family surname Ray Chowdhury was attached to his name as a suffix. Having successfully completed his entrance examination in 1880 in Mymensingh Jilla School, he came over to complete his Bachelor of Arts, his BA, that is his undergraduate studies from Calcutta Metropolitan Institution, now known as Vidyasagar College in Calcutta. He further went on to concentrate on publishing, especially inspired by the poor woodcut line block printing quality for his Bengali book Cheleder Ramayan. This book remains a very popular book even at present times. Having imported books, chemicals and equipments from England and closely studied the process of publishing, Upendrakishore set up his own block-making enterprise in 1895 in Kolkata and called it Ray and Sons. In 1930, Ray and Sons began publishing the famous magazine Sandesh. Many folk tales which became a part of Sandesh found a place in his earlier books, including Tuntunir Boi and Golpomala. However, unfortunately, within a mere 2 years after he began Sandesh, he passed away in Kolkata on December 20th in 1915 at only the age of 52. Upendrakishore was married to Bidhumukhi Devi, the daughter of Darokanath Ganguly and the stepdaughter of Dr. Kadumbini Ganguly, the first female medical practitioner with an Indian medical degree from the Calcutta Medical College. Upendrakishore's eldest daughter, Shukholata Rao, was a famous social worker, and she too wrote for children and edited a newspaper. His eldest son was the celebrated writer, illustrator, poet and publisher Sukumar Rai, who was also the father of raconteur par excellence and Bharat Ratna awardee Satyajit Ray. Upendrakishore's second daughter was Punnalata Chakraborty. His second son was Shubinoy Rai and the youngest was Shubimal Rai. I read the story of The Strange Sea Voyage of Gilfoy from my book, The Collected Stories of Upendrakishore Ray Chowdhury. The story, The Strange Sea Voyage of Gilfoy Sahib. The Bengali title of the story is Gilfoy Sahibir Adbhut Somudro Jatra. Do you all know where the United States of America is located? You see in a map of the world, the oval on the left hand side is the new continent. Note to listeners, this has to be taken into consideration. The story was drafted around the turn of the 1900. I continue. America is located there. The central part of this America is rather thin and looks like two countries. The northern part is North America and the southern part is South America. Among all the countries of North America, the United States is the largest. Gilfoy Sahib, note for all listeners, the word Sahib in this respect is used to denote a foreigner, not to be confused with a representation of class hierarchy. I continue. Was a resident of this very United States. A rather interesting man. Gilfoy Sahib at the time of this story was around 33 years of age. He had spent most of his life on a ship. He had travelled to many places on a ship and seen so many interesting things, but never in his life did he have an opportunity to cross the Pacific Ocean on a small boat. The thought of it often would make him sad. He once told a carpenter to make him a small boat. The carpenter did just that. The length of the boat was 18 feet, its breadth was 6 feet, and its height was 3 feet. This boat was quite sturdy and could carry a weight of 1,866 kilograms. Sahib lovingly named his boat Pacific and said, I will now travel to Australia on this. Now, Australia is located at a distance of around 6,000 miles from America. Sahib gathered enough provisions to last for around 5 months. He loaded everything onto the boat And finally, on 19th of August 1882, Gilfoy Sahib set off for Australia. The first week went off quite smoothly and without any hassle. The only problem was that since the boat was rather shallow, the food would get drenched easily because of the spray of seawater. Then came the little problems of sailing, and those lasted for a month. On some days there was a pleasant wind, while on others there was no wind at all. On such days, shoals of fish and bales of turtles would often gather around the static boat just to look on. With no wind and no movement of the boat, Sahib realized that it was not conducive to eat regularly, as he did not have enough supplies left. Now, sitting in one place and eating less resulted in the death of Sahib's appetite completely. But this also helped him in the voyage. He had developed a habit of sleeping for a couple of hours before sunrise. But suddenly that sleep started to be disturbed by a strange tuck-tuck noise rising from the bottom of the boat. Upon close inspection, Gilfoy Sahib found that several smaller fishes, in an attempt to survive the onslaughts of a massive shark, would flee towards the boat and often would come and bump against the bottom of the boat, causing the tuck-tuck sound. So Sahib decided to drive the shark away. You all must have seen a long rod with a harpoon-like tip held by boatmen. Sahib owned one such apparatus. He held it low as he sat steering his boat and would hit the shark with it the minute it swam towards him. The band of sharks did get scared, but it was only as long as he was awake. So he devised another plan, making a mannequin out of a flowy firan and putting it in his place. This would resemble a human and easily fool the predators, keeping them at bay while he had his nap. Finally, the tuck-tuck noise stopped. On 10th November, Sahib saw a ship passing by and managed to gather adequate provisions from the crew. After that, a strong wind blew continuously for many days. This helped Sahib cover 106 miles in just a day. On 14th November, there was a massive, violent storm that completely toppled Sahib's boat. He swam for a long time before grabbing hold of the ropes of the anchor. For an hour, he struggled to upturn his boat. Alas, it was overturned once again. And the second time, Sahib struggled a little less to make the boat straight, and also was careful while bailing out the water. However, in the midst of all of the chaos, Sahib lost his compass and his watch. A while later, a swordfish bored a hole in one side of the boat. Sahib didn't realize it until much later, when he saw water trickling into the boat and all his things floating in that. He soon had the hole padded up. Soon it was a new year. On January 7, a bird came and sat on the boat. Sahib hunted and ate it. On 11 January, he hunted another bird. At times, a shoal of flying fish would zoom by Sahib and he would catch a few and eat them. On January 16th, the oars broke. He made another set. After that, he managed to hunt a bird only once, and by January 21st, he was starving. He had grown quite sickly by then, and one day Gilfoy Sahib found several oysters stuck on the sides of the boat, and he sucked on a few of them. Then one day he hunted another bird with his gun, but since it fell into the water, he was unable to retrieve it. On 30th January, he hunted another bird and roasted it in the meager fire of a matchstick. By then, he was so weak that he could barely ascertain which direction his little boat was headed towards. One day, as he sat with a forlorn face, contemplating his fate, he suddenly saw an approaching ship. The vessel noticed Gilfoy stranded in the water and took an about turn. The minute he stepped on board, he pleaded for some food. After a hearty meal that restored his energy, the sailors gathered around to listen to his incredible journey. He had written down everything in a notebook. This story was published in an English newspaper from the pages of that notebook. And, my dear listeners, that story was picked up by Upendrakishore Ray Chowdhury and made into this story which I just finished reading for his magazine for children, Shondesh. The same story was included later on in the book by Upendrakishore, Golpamala. There ends the extraordinary story of a small piece of news which appeared in 1883 that inspired Upendrakishore to draft the incident into a story.